Lieutenant Colonel Otoshi, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Tell us when you got into the Army.
I officially entered commissioned service in May of 2000 as a second lieutenant from the United States Military Academy at West Point.
So May of 2000, so about a year and a half into your work with the Army, September 11 took place. Mm-hmm. So let's just talk about that real quick. We'll go back just to a well-known. We'll look at a well-known photograph from that event. So you're a second lieutenant when this happens, the most junior officer in the Army. How did 9/11 change your experience in the Army? So September 10. September 12. How is September 12 different from September 10 because of what happened on that middle day?
So I was in a unique situation. I was stationed at Fort Irwin, California, which is our national training center. I served as opposing forces for our units, going through training. We called ourselves the world-class OPFOR, and we're the reason why the Army was so good. We gave them a real thinking enemy to plan and fight against, and then evaluate how well that they did, and they improved. So September 11th occurred, Fort Irwin, we all went on lockdown. We're breaking out cases of ammo, getting ready for we don't know what. But September 12th turns the corner, and we knew that whatever happened next, we would be the units that we would be training from that point forward would be going somewhere. And so, we already took exceptional pride in our reputation as world-class opposing forces. After 9/11, once 9/12, really you're talking like 9/15, 9/16 when things really start sinking in. You're no longer reacting to the lack of information, stories coming out. It was the knowledge, hey, we got to train our brothers and sisters in arms. We have to do our very best, so whatever combat zone they end up going to, they are absolutely the best prepared they could be.
Yeah, this is for real. And so, the world is a little bit different for everyone on September 12th, but it sounds like the difference for you is that, the difference between you and me is that on September 12th, I'm asking, so what are those people going to do? What are the government people going to do? What are the State Department people going to do? What are the military people going to do? And I'm going to carry on with my life. But for you, it's all about what are we going to do? We're going to do something, so we're getting ready. When I was in Navy boot camp, I remember I got about halfway through Navy boot camp when it dawned on me, I hadn't really thought of it before, that if the United States went to war, that I would be involved somehow. It kind of didn't occur to me that there was a connection between military and war until I was about halfway through boot camp. Did you have an experience something like that? Like, before 9/11, we'd had the Persian Gulf experience, but that was pretty quick and easy. We'd had other small incidents, Grenada, Panama, Mogadishu was serious, but it kind of came and went. Was there that personal sense for you on 9/11, 9/12, 9/13? Like, wow, this is for real, and not only is it for real, but I personally am involved in this thing.
I would say a little bit yes and no. When I signed up and went to West Point, the knowledge that my knowledge was, it was unlikely we'd get in another major conflict after the Persian Gulf War, but there was always that possibility. And as a West Point active duty officer, we would be somewhere in the forefront. Mm-hmm. It just made it much more real once 9/12, 9/13 happened. It's something's about to happen. What had looked like in the future. All right, 3 years on this duty station. My next duty station, I might get a tour to Bosnia on peacekeeping. You might go to the Sinai. It was, all right, the world's now on fire. We've been attacked at home. something's going to happen, and the armed forces are going to be the forefront of making sure this never happens again.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, we have a photo here of you with two enlisted soldiers here, and you what are their names of the two enlisted guys behind you there?
So this was my first tour in Iraq. I was a troop commander, Troop D of the 4th Cavalry. We were assigned convoy escort missions in northern Iraq. So we would escort theater level logistics from all the way from the Turkish border all the way down south of Baghdad. So the giant tankers of fuel, KBR trucks filled with, from things like, those silly little table decorations that you would see in mess halls to major concrete building materials, things like that.
Yeah.
This picture was taken at Kiara West right before we were kicking off on a mission. We were escorting fuel tankers back south to Cobb Spiker in Tikrit, northern Tikrit. You have my driver, Specialist Friedrich, there on the left, and then my gunner and my troop communication specialist, Mike Delgado, over here on the right.
Yeah.
And we're about to kick off on what was normally a 3-hour escort mission. The longest it took us was about 22 hours with IEDs discovered en route.
Yeah.
That mission, I think, went pretty quickly.
So sometimes what should be a 3-hour mission turns into a 22-hour mission because you're just coming across improvised explosive devices along the way.
You would, the most that we ever hit along a route, that particular route, was 5 IEDs, either detonated or found. And then you would have to wait for the EOD elements from one of the other American camps to come down, defuse the device, evaluate it, and then we could move forward with the convoy.
Then you could go again, and you go.
And then you'd hit it again, and the EOD team has moved south to clear another device, so you have to wait for them to come back north. So that's hours compounded on hours. So.
Did you also, at any time, also when you stop for the ID, either because they've exploded or because it's been found, did the insurgents take that as an opportunity then to open up on you?
There were several times, they would use the IED, to stop the convoy and then try a far ambush where they would engage us with machine guns and individual small arms. But they never tried to completely overwhelm the convoy like I know they did several times with unescorted KBR convoys.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us about as you look at this photo and these two enlisted soldiers here, because speaking from the perspective of the junior enlisted guy, you know how it is with the junior enlisted guys. They think that the officers have life easy. Mm-hmm. We have to stand in long chow lines. Their lines are short. We have to live with a whole bunch of people. They have their own rooms, or maybe share with just one other, and all of this. And that was the perspective I had as a junior enlisted guy. The officers live in luxury. But of course, as a 19-year-old, I didn't realize, but they also bear the responsibility. So what comes to mind when you think about, here you are a captain, you're responsible for how many soldiers?
153.
153 soldiers. How old are you?
27.
27 years old. You have command of 123?
53.
I'm sorry, 153 soldiers in a combat zone where people are trying to blow you up and shooting at you, etc. Try to, to people who can't understand, not ever experiencing anything like that, but try to explain what's that like, that burden of leadership in that kind of context.
Truthfully, it's hard to articulate because you can only truly kind of sum it up at the very end. Very much so, the military with our leadership training, and you're dealing with stressful environments. So you're moving from one task to another, but it's it was very weighing, with the knowledge that, even when I could, very often in a couple week period, I tried to go with several convoys, either going north or south. But the realization was I can't go on every convoy, control every situation, and there was no reason for me to, because I had outstanding subordinate level leaders, but the responsibility was still mine. So every time one of my convoys hit an IED, I had someone wounded moving to the hospital, it weighs on you because more so than just a manager in the civilian world, you are the leader. You are responsible to, you brought, all your troopers into the combat zone as well trained as you could possibly make them, and you're responsible to bring them all off the field, standing or not standing. But that responsibility is yours as the commander.
Can you describe for us an incident when one of your soldiers was wounded? You get the word, and then how does that unfold? Is it the first 45 minutes, the first hour, or?
I mean, it's trying to relate it to an equivalent civilian experience. I don't think much of the audience has experience with being a parent yet. But it's much like when your kid's hospitalized for any reason and you are completely powerless to do anything but observe and try to stay out of the way and manage. 2 months in the country, several bad IED strikes on several of my convoys. One of my NCOs badly wounded. Further north, there's nothing I can do from Cobb Spiker except listen to the radio traffic and stay out of their way. So, while responsible, it's an exceptional feeling of helplessness because very much so, we're trained to take charge of the situation, create order out of chaos. And sometimes that means just stay out of the way, let the subordinate level leaders, take charge, set security, set landing zones, get the medevac chopper in, that soldier, move from, where, the point of injury to the nearest level 1 trauma, to suddenly Germany, then to back in the States. You never see them again, completely out of your hands.
So this stuff happens, but you've got to keep moving on.
We had three convoys to move the next day, and without the fuel and other supplies that my guys were escorting in, these super bases that we had, quickly grind to a halt. The patrols that were going out, they don't have the fuel to move. The various parts that we're bringing north for the Humvees, the up armored doors, as we were putting more armor on all the vehicles, doesn't get in place. So that means no missions going out the door.
You got to keep moving.
Mm-hmm. It's a combat zone, so.
Yeah. Let's talk about the lead up to Iraq. So we heard a little bit about your time in Iraq. Let's talk about the lead up to the war in Iraq. So you're in the Army in 2000, 9/11, 2001. You know that the U.S. is going to get involved. The U.S. does invade Iraq, and of course it goes into Afghanistan 2001, Iraq 2003, and then you yourself go first in 2006. What was that preparation like? This is sort of a kind of a variation on the question I have written here, but as you yourself, how far out do you know that you're going to Iraq? Is it a 6-month lead up that you know that you personally are going to Iraq?
It was a little less than 6 months. Okay. I had reported into Fort Riley, had served on the division staff helping train up the 24th Infantry Division staff at Fort Riley. At the time, we were responsible to help train up individual reservists and specific units to deploy overseas. And then I was transferred down to 1st Brigade, 1st Infantry Division as a planner. And initially, the entire brigade was going to go over to Iraq and serve as security forces, escorting the various convoys. And then the brigade was waved off. And so for me, it was like, all right, so I was a single captain, combat was happening, that's where I needed to be. That I need, that's where they needed leaders to lead subordinates in the combat zone. And so very much it was like, all right, so now I'm not going. And I remember having the discussion later with my brigade commander, Colonel Howard, because that weekend we decided, all right, we're not going. We are going to set up this military training facility here at Fort Riley. Well, I'm going to be here for a while. I'm going to buy the big screen TV. I'm going to go all in.
Yeah.
And then that next Monday, the brigade commander calls me in his office and was like, Eli, I'm sending 7 individual companies over to Iraq. I've decided the last one will be my brigade reconnaissance troop, and I'd like you to take charge of it. To which I was like, sir, you're doing this just because I bought that big screen TV this weekend, aren't you?
Right.
It was like, and I'll absolutely look after it for you while you're deployed.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was, at that time, I knew that I was going to take command of D4 Cav, great honor that Colonel Howard gave to me, and
Wow.
I was able to plan our train up as the brigade planner, then transitioning into the troop commander.
Yeah.
And then we continued the training glide path all the way up to deployment.
So just what's maybe I know there's a lot of things you did as you're preparing preparing your soldiers to go. What's one or two key things that were central parts of that training to go to Iraq?
For that first deployment, because we were doing convoy escort with the knowledge we were getting from the unit in theater that we were going to replace, we would focus, just a couple things, something as simple as vehicle recovery under fire. So one of the Humvees is hit, how we have tow straps and everything set up on other vehicles to quickly grab that Humvee, attach it to another vehicle, and so you can pull it while under enemy fire to get it out of that zone while still escorting the rest of your charges.
Yeah.
Combat casualty care, that the cadets here train on how to treat those initial casualties so that that golden hour is extended.
Yeah.
So you can give them the time for a medevac helicopter to get down and get them back.
Yeah.
And then mobile gunnery. So
Yeah.
the gunners in the turret on the 50 cal there being able to hit what they need to as the trucks are moving through an ambush.
And I'm imagining most of your soldiers, since they know this isn't theory, this is for real. What we're working on now is actually going to come in handy 6 months from now. I'm imagining most of them were on the job.
I would say 95%.
Yeah.
Very very focused.
Yeah.
We went from a cavalry troop, who had had a previous deployment to Iraq, so I had a lot of veterans, of about 64 to 159, and then we deployed with 153. A lot of new personnel as we grew in order to have enough sections for all the escort missions that we would have to conduct it within the week time frame. But all the especially all the new kids, they had volunteered in a time of war, knowing what it was, so they were all focused to try to do the best job that they could.
Ready to go. Yeah. So you went to Iraq first in 2006, and then the second time 2010. Is that right?
2011.
2011. And so the first time you're a captain?
First time I'm a captain and a troop commander, working solely with Americans and some third country nationals that drive the trucks.
Okay.
Completely on that side of it.
Okay. And then the second time you're a major, so you've advanced in rank. So I'm thinking about the question of the leadership challenges. Let's focus on that. Leadership challenges you faced in a war zone. What's some of the, or what the difference in leadership challenges you faced as a captain in 2006 and leadership challenges you faced as a major 2011? How would you describe just the different sorts of challenges you faced?
I don't think you can necessarily compare the two. It's apples and pomegranates. my first deployment, I was a troop commander. So I'm in command of a combat formation, and you're responsible for its deployment and execution of mission for the entire year. My second tour, I was a combat advisor. So much like Chad, I was part of a team, not a 12-man team. By that time in 2011, we were at the division and higher level, responsible for liaising with the Iraqi forces. So not as much leadership challenges for myself as just day-to-day interaction with the Iraqis.
I see.
A little bit of interaction. My initial responsibility was overseeing all the interaction with the police forces in Al Anbar province. So I had two other majors that worked with and for me, and so synchronizing their efforts with what our team chief wanted, and
Sure.
through him, the brigade commander.
Yeah, it's a very different jobs. Let me go back to let me see, go back to a photo here that we can look at. There it is. There it is. There. It looks like you're with some locals here. So, in terms of leadership challenges, the jobs are so different. It's really not possible to compare. What about cultural challenges? I'm guessing in the second job as advisor, that's maybe where cultural challenges are more sort of a center stage. How would you describe some of the cultural challenges you face? We see a photo here of you with some locals. What were some of the challenges that you faced?
Well, it's a time and space, problem. By this time in the war, we had a very good advisor training academy at Fort Polk, Tigerland. So we went there. We learned culture, learned language. Read the after-action review reports of the MIT teams that had the previous iterations. So very much so. The initial interaction with culture was very easy for me to absorb. The knowledge, okay, this is a very tribal area, so what this person says as they're meeting me in Fallujah will be different than what this person said. It's very much talking to two mayors of two different towns, two heads of two different tribes. They might belong to, they might be different clans in the same tribe, but they're kind of speaking different nuances. And luckily, my advisor Ed Shamoon, who's a Chaldean Christian, American who had come over, he had been there for a number of years, so he was very attuned to some of these nuances, and we would have those discussions. The most significant problem that we had at the very end was they all knew that the American force was continuing to shrink. So, we were no longer, the force with the biggest stick in the house. Absolutely, if someone came in our backyard, we could absolutely lay waste and destroy any enemy we focused on, but very much so it was now in the Iraqis' hands.
Wow.
Their police, their army, and they knew this. I was probably the 10th or 11th iteration of combat advisor that these Iraqis had worked with. And so it's like, okay, well, what can you do to help me out in terms of material product? I'm going to do what I'm going to do now.
Yeah.
And if you can't help me with ammunition, spare parts, anything else like that,
Yeah.
I'm just going to be very courteous to you, and it was constantly kind of dealing with that, with managing and setting expectations, particularly on our side. It's we don't hold the influence with these tribal chiefs anymore that we used to when we had the logistic and military stick that we could wield and help support. Very much so. If it's something you have to save that silver bullet, because I can't go ask them for something every time, because they're just going to start being very polite and saying no.
Yeah. Did you feel confident? When did President Obama pull all of the troops out? I mean, when did our last troops leave Iraq? Was that 2000?
The last major forces left at the end of 2011.
So were you there right at the tail end?
I was there right at the tail end.
Yeah. So it sounds like by this time, a lot of things that we weren't necessarily aware of, not on a large scale anyway, in 2003, we become aware of it, and so you're getting language training and cultural training, but before you go over. Did you have a sense that the Iraqis there were confident that they would be able to manage the country, that they would be able to hold the country together when the Americans took off?
I can only speak to the Iraqis that I worked with in
Right,
the
yeah.
1st Iraqi Division, as well as the police forces in Anbar. But very much so, they were very confident, very well trained. The police, of course, in Ramadi and Habaniya, very confident in their abilities. They, just like any police department, wanted more resources to train their personnel. General Mahmoud in Fallujah absolutely controlled Fallujah.
Yeah.
First Iraqi Division, the general is exceptionally competent, and more so when you talk to the junior level leaders in the formation, they were very smart, very personable. They understood it. They understood what it would take, and at least at that time they were confident that even without American soldiers on the ground, that they could at least manage the situation.
Yeah. Was it your sense that the ones that you had contact with, that they were glad to see the Americans going? And I don't mean that in the sense of anti-American, but they were glad to see that at that moment it appeared that, okay, things were stable, a decent future is possible, so the Americans are going, and that's a good thing, because that means we can stand up on our own. Was that kind of their sense?
Yes and no. Very much so. Just talking the Army forces, 1st and 6th Iraqi divisions, they were confident that they could, do the job. They, very much so wanted, hey, we will dictate the strategy where we need to go. We understand the ground. We don't need, the Americans per se telling us where to go, what to do. But, especially amongst the Iraqi military, which was my involvement, they would have rather had us there in the neighborhood. We had the technological resources. We were able to give them intelligence, airstrikes, constant training.
Sure.
To sit in their mess halls and discuss, hey, how Americans do military operations, things like that. So, at least the Iraqi military officers I worked with during my time there at the end would have rather had us keep, some sort of presence there to, bolster their own efforts.
Yeah, and in 2011, 2012, there was that conversation about whether American troops should stay there. Of course, in 2018, there are American troops back there now, and the story keeps going. But just two more questions. Your career, of course, you're still active duty in the Army, but your Army career basically coincides almost perfectly with the war against terrorism. I mean, you're in for a year and a half, and the war on terrorism starts, and it's still there. I mean, we're still in Afghanistan. What is a major thing that either speaking for yourself, what you have learned as an Army officer, or as someone who's been in the Army now for a long time, what do you think is something important that you or the Army have learned since 9/11?
Well, I can't speak for the Army. I can only speak for myself in terms of what I've learned as I've progressed through the ranks. Very much so, culture matters.
Culture matters, yeah.
And not just the culture of what both your enemy and your allies in the field. The various cultures of the soldiers that we work with. I mean, in that previous picture, Delgado, from New York City, Friedrich from the center of the country.
Yeah.
You know, just various cultures of the various soldiers that I'm working with.
Oh.
You know, it's multiple iterations. You know, working with that. You know, working with people from other countries. You know, it's as an Army officer, it's important to take that into account. It's not all a matter of, okay, I'm going to take my 70-ton tank and just run over everything and start shooting things. It's that's part of it sometimes, but very much you have to understand the environment and the culture that you're working with.
The culture within and the culture outside. Yeah.
And then very much so, never underestimate your enemy. I think, and the importance of the after-action review process. I know, personally for myself in the very beginning, after the invasion of Iraq and we defeated Saddam Hussein's army, it's like, all right, we got this. We have the baddest tanks in the world, best trained military, and then the insurgents start to kind of snipe at us. And very much so, I had fallen into the hubris of underestimating the enemy.
The mission accomplished phenomenon, right? I mean, kind of like that.
Well, very much, incorrectly, with the culture, it's like, these are, yokels from the backcountry picking up arms, professional military force, and then you start seeing what they're able to do, and it's like, no, this is a well-motivated enemy who's, very smart, able to, as we adapt to what we're doing.
They can slow a convoy down that should take 3 hours. They can slow it down to 22.
Yeah, so very much so. Never underestimate them. Don't overestimate, but never underestimate their capacity for intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you just one last question then, because now you're the commander of the ROTC program here in Northwest Arkansas at the University of Arkansas. Given your 2 deployments in Iraq, what is, I know there's a lot that you want your cadets to learn, that the Army wants your cadets to learn. What do you think is the most important thing for your cadets to learn?
This being my second iteration teaching ROTC, right, it's kind of interesting. My 2 tours in Iraq were interrupted with a brief stint teaching ROTC. I would say what I've, particularly with the seniors this year, constantly reinforcing is, as lieutenants going out in the force, it's duty. They will have a duty to their formations, a duty to accomplish the mission, very much so a duty, above and beyond themselves. It's no longer, as an officer, as a leader, it's not about yourself, how you feel, how tired you are, how this is going to interfere with, your weekend plans to go juggling or bowling or whatever they do these days. Not that I went juggling or bowling in my youth. But it's about that formation. You, as the lieutenant, you have a duty to accomplish the mission. In order to accomplish that mission, you have to make sure that formation is the best trained and best prepared that it needs to be. So that means, late nights, doing your inventories, counseling soldiers, saying they're helping the kid who's just gotten a divorce, or the sergeant who's just lost his parents, and then the next morning at 05:30 you're in for your pre-workout to make yourself just a little bit stronger in order to better lead your formation at PT. And then as you're eating, you're getting into books about doctrine, so you're able to better lead the platoon in whatever doctrinal training that they need to do. It's all about duty.
Yeah, all about duty. It's not just the convoy, it's the people who make the convoy work.
Well, without those soldiers, well trained, best prepared, both mentally, physically, there is no convoy. So
that's right.
By myself, I can't accomplish the mission. But with well-trained subordinate leaders, with well-trained subordinate formations, very little can stop us once we're told, okay, this is the hill I need you to take. Use that concept of mission command. Here's your purpose, key tasks. I'm not going to tell you how to get it done, just get it done. You know what I'm talking about, Matthew.
You're talking to us cadets. Well, sir, Lieutenant Colonel Otoshi, thank you very much for speaking with us this evening. Appreciate it.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. All right. Cool.